Welcome to the Spy Who Raised Me podcast. Conversations between a daughter and her father. Yes, you've guessed it, he was a spy. We're sitting in a hotel in Larnaca. We're on day 3 of a trip down memory lane to the island on which I was born.
Yes.
And where you were based.
Yes.
And we've come at a time when Cyprus is still incredibly, if not even more so, strategically important, being located where it is. And it's been such a poignant visit, hasn't it, on so many levels?
Very, very emotional and very interesting to see how the island has changed. Oddly enough, in terms of the southern base area, which is where I worked and where you were born, in fact, Kelly Hospital, that was in the southern base area. That is still there, not the hospital, though, sadly. It would have been nice to go and look at the register to see that when you were born and the details of your birth, but that was knocked down some years ago, I think. There is a new hospital, but it's in a different location. So that was a very emotional day, going through it all, seeing as much as we could, putting as many question marks to origins in Cyprus. And it was such an upheaval in 1974 when the Greek forces attempted coup d'etat. They did this because they wanted to annex the island of Cyprus and make it a Greek island, rather than what it was, which was in the north Turkish community and the south Greek community. So this they did in 1974. Very swiftly, the Turkish army responded with very heavy missiles, not missiles, but they had aircraft, they had tanks, they had large numbers of troops. So there was, for some short periods of time, there was mayhem in Cyprus, bombs dropping, people killed, until a truce was called.
But during that time, there was a lot of movement of people, as there always are in situations like that. So we were talking to one family that had fled with nothing to the south of Cyprus, leaving behind their homes and their businesses. They were telling us that 150,000 Greek Cypriots moved from the north and 60,000 Turkish Cypriots moved from the south. And there's now a buffer zone that runs right across the island, and it sort of zigzags, not a perfect zigzag, a zag and a zig, right away across the island. And we've been across the line and back twice since we got here, through border control, having to show our passports. Quite vociferous checks on the way back into the Greek part of the island, where just to check that we hadn't bought goods from the north of the island. But where we went today was to Varosha, which was what they call the ghost town in the buffer zone, which is the whole area of the buffer zone was created by the United Nations. And Varosha, which is now called the ghost town as far as tourists are concerned, really is where these people fled, that part of Famagusta. We were taken there by a guy called Nikos. He and his wife run the Famagusta viewpoint, and they've got this little business taking tourists into Varosha to see it. But that was such a
poignant thing to do. Sit there and listen to these two people who had lived there, had businesses there, had 2 homes there, and all of a sudden they had nothing. So they had to evacuate it from where they had lived and finished up in the southern base area, which was safe, but so crowded with Greek people who had nowhere to go. All of a sudden they had no homes, they had no one to support them. So thankfully in the southern base area they got some lifestyle, but very primitive, and they lived in tents. They had to find meals where they could. The southern base provided some meals, but the number of people there who were crowded into this small area was just incredible. Did you find that, Jane, when you...
Yeah, I mean, we walked through this part of Varosha, this ghost town as it's been christened. It is literally that. You can't deny that it isn't an apt name for the place. You walk into it and it's been overtaken by the plants that were in people's gardens and growing along the roadsides.
Yes.
You know, all of the roads are covered with vegetation. The bird life is vibrant in there, but really that's the only, it's wildlife
and
that lives snakes. Yeah, so wild,
A lot of snakes.
lots of snakes.
Snakes, rats, and birds. That's about all that they have there now.
It was, you could see that people had just departed, and there were still curtains in the window, plates on the tables. There would have been, but all of that's been looted by the incoming population. It felt a real privilege, a very sad privilege, to walk around that part of the town.
And the size of that corridor, which is now uninhabited, was surprising. You know?
It's really wide, wasn't it?
It's really wide, and all the buildings, as you say, are still there. Some of the wonderful hotels they had there are still there with the signs on the side, and people like, who did you say had visited?
Well, it was probably one of the top tourist destinations in the world, and certainly in Europe. But Sophia Loren, Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, the royals, all used to go there on their holidays. It was a very upmarket part to go to.
Now it's a crumbling mass of, still there. I mean, the shape is still there. The signs are still there. But it's just, having been there, and you must have felt it the whole time you were walking around there. Yeah, it was just so poignant.
It was. Walking around with somebody who'd lived there, it was a huge part of his history. He left there at 12, as did his wife. And his children have never lived in Famagusta, even though that's their hometown.
Right.
But walking around with him was a very humbling experience, to hear about his memories and his regret, and also how life is now. And the Greek Cypriots that were driven from their homes, they feel like they give everything. This is their words, it's not our words. And the Turks take everything. So the Turks can move freely over the border to the south. They can work, they can earn money, and they have the same rights as the Greeks. So they are eligible for a pension if that's what the terms are of their employment. But there's no freedom for the Greek Cypriots to move over the border in the same way. And certainly no recompense for the property and land that they've lost.
Absolutely none. And Erdogan, the president of Turkey, he's threatening to push further at some stage. And one of his comments was he wished they had done so when in 1974, when they invaded. They should have taken the whole island. But I mean, we travelled a lot around Cyprus today, and it's a wonderful place. The farming, the Nicosia we visited, we went as far as the north coast to Belapes and Kyrenia. It is so well kept now, but wherever you go, you sense this slight antimony between the Greeks and the Turkish community. The Turkish community is quite strident, I guess you could say, whereas the Greeks, because of the position they're in, although they live in a lovely part of Cyprus with a lot of agricultural land, and so they produce a lot. But for all those people who suffered and who businesses and homes were taken, they're just in such a difficult situation, waiting to see whether at some stage they can gain access again to where they lived and where they had businesses. I think you must have felt when we drove into the sovereign base area, there's so many requirements to show your credentials, to show, your passport. And you think, my God, what is this? You have to do it both ways. When you go in, when you come out. It's just such a difficult place for people to live in now. Not many in the sovereign base area that we saw anyway, not many Brits. There were a few who are probably permanently posted there, or at least do some of the duties necessary. But they were
You mean at the borders?
At the borders, yes, the border zone.
Going back to what we were saying at the beginning about the strategic position of Cyprus. Militarily, it is, because of where it is, so important. And part of the deal with the Brits, so it was under British occupation, and the Greek Cypriot guy we travelled to Varosha with today said we were better under the British rule because we definitely don't have independence now.
Yes.
What we were talking about when we were with him is the strategic importance of Cyprus, given that it's above the Middle East, it's close to Africa, it's in Europe. So strategically, it is still as important. And the Brits did a deal back when Cyprus got independence in 1960 to retain some British sovereign land on the island.
Yes.
And those are the military bases.
Yes, yeah.
So there's intelligence, there's all the military forces based there. Given your knowledge, you were based here from 66 to 68. Given your knowledge of those bases, having worked in them, how do you think, given everything that's going on in the Middle East at the moment and how volatile it is, how busy, fraught, important are those bases? And is it for the personnel that are based there at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's such a lot going on. And, there is an American base too, which is quite heavily loaded, I think, with aircraft, with pilots, with people there who are responding to some of the crises in the Middle East. So you have so much changing in the Middle East that it's very difficult to plan and, just getting so much intelligence they need now to decide what's happening. I mean, with the Middle East everywhere, there's so many things that are unresolved and so many attempts to sequester land, to impose, different countries like in Gaza and like in Israel. I mean, that conflict is just incredible. But also in Iraq, Iran, Syria, there are so many things going on that basically countries can't plan. They have to react rather than foresee what is going to happen and wait to see what comes from Iraq, from Iran, from Syria. All these countries, even China and Russia, use their might and their power to get what they want in that area. So the more intelligence that's acquired by certain means, and certainly in the sovereign base enemy area, there are still signs of what is being done, collecting information and satellite and other means of sending data. So it's all very knife edge, and I think we were privileged to have seen that and been allowed to go into the sovereign base area, but also to be welcomed by the Greek family that showed us around and were very solicitous and gave us a lot of information and really imparted, especially with the lady, exactly how they felt and how the Greek population feel. They are making the best of what they have, but they have no idea what will happen in the future. There are so many vested interests in Cyprus that it's not a question of going to the United Nations or using other bodies to decide what's going to happen. Hence, since 1974, nothing's been done. Still as it was. There's still this huge area of land that nobody lives in and is now crumbling. I mean, it's just so poignant to look at that and to walk. We walked, must have been a couple of miles up through it and turned and came back. The only use that the Greeks have is a very, very small area of beach, lovely sandy beach, but they're so restricted. Passports have to be checked whenever they move through. It's a difficult place to live in.
And winding the clock back to when you were there, you said today that you were in the listening services, you were in communications, and you were saying that you were listening to countries in the Middle East. Which countries were there, and what were the complexities of listening to those countries?
Well, at that time, in the 60s, early 70s, so much was going on in those countries who had discovered oil. And oil was such a big factor. Energy and how to get the oil out of it. And the technology that was developing then was incredible. But the only way we could keep in touch with what was happening, the advances that were being made, the methods of extracting oil, had to be monitored to the best of our abilities. So we had various means of monitoring what people were doing in Iraq, Iran to a certain degree. It was such an important issue in those times because those countries who had oil supplies in huge amounts were really in a very strong position. So we had to devise as many ways as we could, both through satellite and other methods, to keep abreast and find out what was going on in some of these really important places, like Al-Mosul was one of the places where oil had been discovered. And it was a question of hanging in there just to see how advanced they were becoming. It was a great surprise to find that some of the collection methods they had and the antenna that they used for satellite and other forms of transmitting were still there. And I don't understand that. you could see the same antenna, and I've no doubt that there have been certain improvements on how they collect information, but the fact that they're still there as part of the scenery is just unbelievable.
You said that you had to learn a different kind of Morse code.
Yes, I mean they were because they were an Arab nation. They had strange ways of sending Morse.
This is Iraq.
This is Iraq, and so we had to train in a different type of Morse, and it was very truncated. They had the letters and numbers that they transmitted with information were sent in a different way. So we had to go through a whole process, 2 or 3 months of relearning Morse code, so that we could follow what the Arabs were sending.
And what was it called?
Box was the name they gave it. God knows where that was coined, but that's where it was. And yeah, so very interesting visit, and I think you got a lot out of it, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. We've never been back since I was born and since we left, but coming back, of course, it feels part of you because it is part of your history.
It is part of, yeah.
And we've been really welcomed. Everybody that we've spoken to who've asked, why are we here? What are we doing? Told them we'd lived in Famagusta. They said, well, you're part Cypriot. It's part of your history too, which it is.
That's right.
So it's been really poignant. It's also been lovely travelling with you, father and daughter. It's a rare thing.
Yes, it is.
And that's lovely to reflect on and to remember. I've learnt things about our time here that I didn't know before. You've reflected on me being a baby here. That's lovely history that you probably wouldn't have been triggered if we hadn't travelled here together.
No, that's right. And I think that's important, I mean, it's family, isn't it, doing that? I think it was an incredible trip.
It was. And it was bittersweet as well because we spent time living in Istanbul too. And I love Turkey. And I've always found the Turks to be so welcoming, so hospitable and warm. I've got nothing but good memories of our time living in Turkey, and I've been back many times since and loved travelling all over. I haven't spent any time in the east of Turkey, but all over Turkey. And I love the country and I love the people.
Yes.
So I found that really quite unsettling to hear about the invasion, to hear how the Greek Cypriots were treated. Now, we did hear it from Greek Cypriots, so, it was charged with emotion, but, it's undeniable when you see Varosha and you see no man's land and you see the border controls that it was hostile. And it would have been very painful for people that had to leave everything. And it must have been really difficult for the other countries that were based here. So Britain especially, it had been an island under British, it was part of British territory until 1960. So the Brits have always had a big and important relationship with Cyprus. But for them, for the British people that were based here, and particularly those that lived through 1974, they must have thought, rightly, wrongly, if this had still been a British territory, this would never have happened.
No.
And it was really interesting to hear Nikos, the Greek Cypriot, say that today. He more or less said, if it had remained British,
it would have been stable, and
it would have been stable.
All those countries with strong armies, in particular Greece and Turkey, they have so much power. Those armies, that it's a serial thing. I was saying to you, when I came back in 1967, 68, flew back from the UK into Ankara for an onward flight to Cyprus. As we landed, the Greek army had taken over the airport. So they had tanks, they had loads of soldiers everywhere. And you think, how does this happen in these countries, that have... So I think it's something that won't change. And in the short term, I think they're so powerful. And now you find some sort of amalgamation between the army and the politicians, because people gravitate where the power is. You have a very strong army and you have politicians who are determined to stay in power. it's a potent mix, and it leads to so many traumas in the world, I think.
It does. And I think the other thing that I've really reflected on today particularly is I think the British have done so much. I was going to use the word damage, but I think that's probably a little bit harsh. But I think the British have been a big part of so many nations as part of the empire. And some of it was damaging. The Greek Cypriot guide today said, yes, but they left a lot of good too. There's a lot to be thankful for that British occupation. And just hearing his thoughts, his perspective on Britain probably made me less, I mean, it didn't make me less anti-empire, because I still think the way that we globe-trotted and thought the British way was the right way. For sure, there is some good that we left behind, but it was incredibly arrogant. But just hearing his view about the protection that British brought, and I would think, Dad, now with the sovereign bases still being here, in fact, one person did say today that they feel that they are protected and there is less of a threat because of that American and British presence on the island. They feel safer from both Turkey, but also from the south, from the Middle East and what's going on there. They feel like they have a degree of protection because of that.
And when driving around as we did today from Famagusta up to Nicosia, it's such a well-organized country. I mean, the agriculture you mentioned, the soil is so good and it's so flat. I mean, there are thousands of acres of land that are dead flat. So you don't have excessive rain. So the climate is favorable, and the farmers all looked. I mean, it just looked sort of normal, didn't it? Tractors on the field and people working. You couldn't look at that part of Cyprus and think, you can see the effects that the war must have had. I mean, they were just doing what they do as farmers and producing food. And Nicosia was a bit like that. I mean, Nicosia was normal, friendly.
A working city.
Working city, lots of different personalities. I was quite, fond of the way they were all mixing together. And the lunch we had was superb, wasn't it? It was a Lebanese lunch, and there were all sorts of people coming. It's a holiday, isn't it? Religious holiday. And it was normal. It was normal.
What's interesting about the country, and you think of strategic importance, and I suppose it's what it needs to think about as a nation strategically, and of course defence is one of those things. Independence is another. But one of the other things that really struck me, and I didn't realise until we were travelling around and speaking to people, is that Cyprus is incredibly short on water. And so they run 3 desalination plants to provide water for both citizens, for domestic consumption, but also for agriculture. I mean, the cost of doing that is colossal. So Cyprus must be doing okay in terms of its GDP, but also I do wonder whether it attracts a good proportion of external support from the EU, the World Bank and the likes because of its strategic importance as an island.
The Turkish government can't expect to annex the island, and neither can the Greeks. They have to live in harmony and try and find some common ground. But I think they are attempting to do that. I felt talking to the 2 people there. But you're here, Jane? Yeah,
we're here, and we travelled through parts of the island where you and Mum and your friends spent a lot of time, and our wider family.
Yes.
And you were telling me a little bit about what that lifestyle was like. Just take me back to that time when you were based in Famagusta, when you were travelling to the sovereign base.
Sovereign base, yeah. That was...
what was your life like?
That was... Well, I mean, compared to the UK, which is where we were all working, I mean, it's a great country, but for young people in their 20s and their early 30s, to go to a paradise like Cyprus was incredible. I mean, you could do anything. You could water ski, you could ski up and Trudus Mountains, you could loads of sport everywhere. You could go on holiday. Beirut wasn't very far away. And for we youngsters, it was amazing. You could learn to water ski, and we did. Quite a few of us did that. Looking back, I guess the early 60s and through the 60s into the 70s. It was just marvellous. It was a lovely lifestyle. Sharing with the army at Ios Nikolaios was great because we could benefit from some of their sports facilities. And I mean, there were a lot of service people who came out, both Air Force and Army, not so much Navy. And they were so well organised, and so well taken care of as far as sports were concerned. I just loved it. It was amazing.
What was the relationship like? So you were here in the intelligence arm of the RAF, and you would have been very much a part of that Foreign Office military presence here on the islands. What sort of people were here during that time, and what sort of things were they doing in terms of British presence?
Well, I mean, because the messes were here, the officers' mess and other ranks and parades, and it was just like a normal sort of service routine that they had. And like I say, the young soldiers who came out here, some were on national service, and they were, I mean, as far as sport was concerned, that was incredible because you got some of the top footballers coming out and other sports people who were doing the 2 years, part of which would have been in Cyprus. So they came and we were flabbergasted seeing those people who we had supported in big teams, and there they were. Some of the fathers of those talented players, I can remember one, George Lyle, who played for Preston North End, I think it was. He was a great player, but also all the top football teams came out for the summer breaks. So we had the opportunity to go to nightclubs with the England team, for example. Tottenham was there, Arsenal was there. I remember watching a match with Jimmy Greaves. Jimmy Greaves was an incredible footballer. Everyone had lined up, the ones who weren't working, to watch this phenomenon. Jimmy Greaves, he was great. We were in a nightclub one night, and the team was, they'd had a few beers. The whole team, so they were all famous people. Dave Mackay was at the bar having a few drinks and, just enjoying themselves. He turned to this player, he said, "Come on then, do your party piece." So this guy was quite shy and diffident. He said, "No, not yet, too many people." And Dave Mackay said, "Come on, do it." So this player, who was a great header of the ball, took a coin out of his pocket, and he'd had a few drinks. So he flicked this coin up in the air, caught it on his forehead, and then he dropped it onto his toe, got it on his toe, flicked it up, and got it on his forehead. And he must have done that 20 or 30 times.
Wow.
And of course they're all cheering, saying, yeah. Gilzine, that was his name, Alan Gilzine. We got autographs of all the top players, and some of them came if they were looking for a game of tennis. They could come to the Sovereign Base area and play there. I remember playing one of the wingers who was the top winger for Tottenham, I think it was. He said, "You mind if I come and play tennis?" And I said, no, come and have a game. I'll give you a game. And I thought he won't be that much good at tennis because he's a
footballer.
Not good. He was incredible. He could hit the ball like all these talented athletes are, they can turn their skills to any sport.
What a privileged time, Dad.
It was.
You talk about Cyprus, and also we were in Delhi for some time, and we were in Istanbul. And I can remember Delhi, and I can remember Istanbul. And it did feel a real privilege, even as a child, to be a part of that. I look back on it now, and they were fun times, and your times were fun times. And that must have been such an eye-opener for you and Mum, coming from villages in the northeast of Scotland. I mean, you'd travelled, you'd been over to Hong Kong in your previous posting, but Mum had never left Scotland. And you drove her down through the Alps, pregnant with me,
on
Austin Healy Sprite in February.
With a soft top.
With a soft top to move to Cyprus. That must have been so exotic.
Yeah, I mean, it was a privilege. That's for sure. Something you never forget. But as we discussed in the car when we were coming back from Nicosia, the important thing is to keep in touch with some of the people that you worked with and share time with. And that's incredible if you can do that, after 50 years. pick up a phone and talk to somebody that you'd worked with, that many years ago. And it kind of stabilizes life, that, because instead of being in your own little sphere of, working and putting out the bins and things like that, all of a sudden you can open up the page, the book, and talk to people who were there and shared those good times.
Yeah, you can do that, and you can also, we've talked a bit about this when we've been travelling around over the last few days, that as adults, I'm in my middle ages, you're in your older dotage.
A little bit, yeah.
And although you behave the same age as me, I think that there is more interest in who you are, where you come from, and the context, what was going on at that time. And one of the things that I know to be true, and we've done a lot of over the last few days, is just talk to people.
Yes.
It's easy to walk past somebody. Like when we went to the Famagusta viewpoint, it's this little unobtrusive place on a dusty road, really simple. They've made their own little museum with a handwritten sign, and we nearly did pass by it.
Yes, well, you insisted in going there, and I thought, what's this all about? But when we got there, and like you say, open up a conversation, ask questions. When you did that, she opened up, and she said when we left, "Thank you for being interested."
And she said, it really touched me. She said, "You're a Cypriot to me." I was born in Cyprus, so therefore I would love another passport to give me free access to Europe.
Well, you were getting advice from the guy
shopkeeper.
The shopkeeper saying, "I know how you can get it." I mean, we went for lunch in a restaurant in Nicosia, and it was we're just wandering through. You found it and said, "Oh, that looks good." Sat down within minutes. The Lebanese, I guess he was Lebanese, the guy who owned it, came across and said, "What would you like?" We said,
"We'll have a meze.
Lunch. We'll have And he came with a load of Lebanese food. But then, what did we do after we'd finished and paid the bill? Remember, you said, "I wonder what the smoking."
Oh yeah, they were smoking.
Yes. So we went and asked
pipes.
And said, there was an awful lot of smoke. It was like, I don't know, like vapes on some kind of accelerant.
It was hubble bubble.
Hubble bubble. And they were sitting there puffing away in great clouds of smoke. But it was as innocuous as, because it was fruit, basically, wasn't it?
It was a lovely day, and we'd driven past restricted areas, so both in terms of the sovereign bases, the military establishments. A friend of the family advised us on no uncertain terms, do not stop, do not take any photographs, because those bases are so busy and vigilant at the moment. And the same with no man's land. Nobody, when we were speaking to them today, to the Greek Cypriots that took us into Varosha today, they were saying that people basically do not, especially the Greek Cypriots, do not cross those lines. Because it's just not safe to do so.
Yeah.
And on an island that's so tourist orientated, it's unbelievable to think they've got this strip running through the middle.
Oh, it's just crazy, isn't it? And it's a large piece of ground. I don't know maybe...
It depends where you are. It's
half a mile across or something? And
some places it may be, I don't know, Dad, but I read Cal Flynn's book, Islands of Abandonment, which is fabulous. And it basically, she wrote a book about places where humans have deserted. And so there was Verdun, there was an area, dockside in London, where they started building gas tanks. Forth of Firth, the fort that's in the Forth of Firth. So she's looked at all sorts of places where there are, humans fled.
Yeah.
And one of the areas she looked at was no man's land, the Green Line.
Oh, right.
In Cyprus. And the wildlife that's returned amidst all of this angst and hurt and aggression. You've got this strip of land, urban and rural, where wildlife has returned.
It's incredible. Maybe not a bad idea for some of the cities to do that if they could. Trouble is getting people out of their houses to give them the space. But no, you're right. I don't know what the guide was saying, he was describing, but he was saying that there are big black snakes that inhabit the vegetation between the
in the ghost town
buildings, and they live on rats. There's obviously a plague of rats, and they're so big now. Did he say that one was long enough to go from one edge of the
I don't know. He said that the snake get bigger than it because there's no vehicles driving through there to run them over. And they've got free run of the old town.
Yes.
I mean, it was eerie, but the plant life there was incredible.
Oh, incredible. I know, and you could see the opulence of some of the hotels and some of the buildings. A good day, Jane.
It was a good day.
It was a good day.
What are your reflections on the last 3 days returning to Cyprus?
I think it was quite emotional because, like I say, you know, young people having the privilege of coming to an island like Cyprus, having been brought up in a wee village in the north of Scotland where it snowed in the winter, and it was just crazy. It was so liberating in a sense. You could do anything. I mean, there was nothing that you couldn't do in terms of sport. Sailing was another thing you could do. Water skiing, you know, it was just so easy. You didn't have to make an effort. And there were always enough people there of your own sort of generation that you could say, come on, let's do this, or let's do that. Let's go. And snorkeling and diving was another thing that a group of us did. So you could do a course on that. And I mean, you picked up so many skills in a country like that.
It's been a wonderful trip, something that I'd recommend anybody to do, to revisit with their father or their mother or their grandfather or their grandmother, to go back to those places because it triggers so many emotions that and memories as well. You know, for me, they weren't memories because I was too young, but for you, so many memories. And for me, even though I don't remember, it is part of my life. And it's been really emotional coming back and hearing about the island's history. And, you know, it's kind of been part of my life. Of course it has, because I was born here. But it's not really felt part of my life until I came back.
Until you came back, that's right. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, it's the same for me because it's such a long time ago that I've forgotten a lot of detail. But you don't forget, really, you know, when you have periods of like that in your life when you do different things and you've got no fear, you know, you just go and do it at that sort of age. And
it's also, you know, important to appreciate your own history, your own family's history. I think it's so easy to get caught up in your day-to-day life and to live in the present. And I'm not one for living in the past at all, but I think it's really important to know what your past is and to celebrate that past because it is part of what makes you you.
Well, that's right. No, that was, and I think when we chatted to the Greek Cypriots who were organising the visit into the sovereign base area, they were quite touched, I think, by the fact that when they learned that you were a Cypriot, she was kind of gleeful and said, well, you're a Cypriot. No,
it's been a wonderful few days, Dad, and I've enjoyed every moment of it.
Well, thank you very much. And you've ferried me around the country. My God, you're an organiser, Jane. Hire a car, and the first day we booked a car, went there, and there was a dilapidated office with no people and no cars.
No cars.
And then it took you about 10 minutes to book something else. No, it was truly remarkable. We've only been here, 4 days in total. We've done a lot.
We certainly have.
So we'll do something else in the months to come. But we'll keep doing the podcasts.
Definitely.
Yes.
Thank you, Dad. No.
Thank you too.
Enjoy your beer.
Yeah, it's almost finished.